Joining us now, Denver Riggleman, Congressman, 5th District, Virginia, Republican, knows a little about intel, knows a little about the North Koreans, been following them for a long time. Congressman, great to have you, sir.
Hey, John, how are you this morning?
Congressman, never
I'm
better.
here.
Thanks for joining us. Congressman, let's get right to North Korea. The president 2 hours from touching down in Hanoi, where he's going to meet with Kim Jong-un. He's on a diplomatic mission. What are your thoughts? What are the stakes going in, and what do you look for?
Well, the first thing is to see what actually comes out of the first couple days of meetings, if there's actually the ability to have dialogue, if there's any kind of concrete proposals that North Korea would offer for denuclearization or some kind of preventative measures for that, and how South Korea reacts to it. I mean, a lot of times you want to look at the border countries specifically, to their south, and see if South Korea has something specific they want to add. And I got a feeling that South Korea is going to be a huge part of this because it affects them more than anyone. So, you just look at these certain, indicators coming out of there. And by the way, I mean, nobody's done anything for 50 years. So I think it's probably time that we actually get serious about this. And that's why I'm optimistic, at least cautiously optimistic, that we're involved in a dialogue at this point.
Let me ask you something, Denver Riggleman. What is the downside of the president meeting with Kim Jong-un and trying to work out a negotiation and further diplomacy? What exactly is the downside?
The downside is North Korea not honoring their agreements. But as far as engaging, there is no downside. I think that's the thing that I don't, people seem to get confused on engaging with North Korea. There's no downside. I mean, but once you engage with them, just make sure they honor any commitment that they actually make. That's the downside is, can you trust North Korea to do anything that you ask them to do? To this point, that's a big no. But, there's also a time where North Korea, the law of diminishing returns, their country is in dire straits. And my guess is the reason they want a deal is because they're just having a tough time, a real tough time.
Denver, do you ever see a scenario where they would actually legitimately could consider denuclearization?
Well, I think it would take a lot of transparency. The only way they could do it is to allow complete access to their programs. And they would want a lot of buy-in. And when I say buy-in, you know what I mean. They would want us to prop up much of their industry and to come in big time, I think, financially. And they would want us to release sanctions. So if we do all that, the transparency there would have to be unprecedented. So to tell you that there's no downside to talking to them, but and I'm optimistic about that, but I'm pessimistic that they would be completely transparent about their nuclear program.
So, Denver, based on the history of them, you're suspect that they would really ever denuclearize, but you feel it's worth an ongoing dialogue. Because look, there's no downside because it's not like the president has softened, reduced, or taken off any of the sanctions. They're still on.
and that's right. And I think the pain that they're feeling is real, and that's why they came to the table. But again, they played this game for decades, and I think everybody has to go in with eyes wide open.
Yeah, I think you're right. No question about it. We'll look forward to what the president has to say. Let's get to Afghanistan, Denver Riggleman. There was a report in the New York Times the other day that the Taliban in Afghanistan has grown stronger than ever, and that as we withdraw troops, that goes stronger. And there's a question now whether or not the Afghan security forces are going to be able to maintain the territory they have once we withdraw. On the other hand, I don't think anybody wants to be in Afghanistan in perpetuity. So is there a negotiated settlement here that might be in our future, you think, sir, that everybody could live with?
Well, I think that's the other problem we have, right, John, is that does anybody trust negotiating with a group such as the Taliban? I've been watching, as people are like, hey, we're negotiating with the Taliban, this is great, and all of a sudden, you find out that the Taliban is starting to consolidate power in those areas, as we negotiate. There's certain people that are tough to negotiate with. The Taliban don't understand it. They'll use that as cover, And again, it comes down to a decision that the United States has to make. Are we prepared to be involved in every portion of the world that has a problem? Are we prepared for that? And at what point is our military stretched too thin? And I think that's one of the hardest questions that we have to ask as a country is at what point do we say, okay, these guys are on their own? I think we're getting close to that. I think we certainly need a real plan, a mission plan that tells us what our end game is. Once we have that, we get to that end game, and then we say, okay, enough is enough. I just got a feeling we're there, and I think somebody's got to take the ball on this, and it might be Congress, it might be military commanders in theater, but there needs to be a better mission plan.
Right, so your position, and it's been for some time, is that the mission in Afghanistan laid out by General McMaster at the time, many people called it McMaster's Surge or McMaster's War, that there's no real end game here, no clear objective other than just be there.
Just be there right now. It's really for, as you know, it's geopolitical stability based on our presence and our treasure. And that's where we're at right now. So I think at some point we have to revisit, are we okay with the type of treasure we're spending for whatever we defined as geopolitical stability, which I don't think we've defined it very well. So, and I think that's something we're going to have to visit pretty hard here in the coming months.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, trucking the truth across America. I'm with Republican Congressman Denver Riggleman. Denver represents the 5th District of Virginia. That is the south side of Virginia area. That is a bigger geographical district than the state of New Jersey. So it's a very large landmass. Congressman, I want to go, let's stay international. I want to go to the Yemeni situation. Senior advisor to the president, Jared Kushner, yesterday meeting with MBZ in the United Arab Emirates, trying to get better cooperation there. And, of course, one of the topics coming up is the crisis in Yemen and the U.S.'s continued backing of the Saudi Emirates coalition in the Yemeni civil war, which is now causing famine and disease and starvation that is beyond anything that we've seen. And to be honest, if the New York Times was spending as much time on that crisis or they are about the fake news on Robert Mueller's investigation, Americans would be outraged by what is going on there, Denver. And I know that you're aware of this. I mean, the crisis in Yemen, I mean, kids are starving and eating leaves and bark off trees. There's no medicine. Yet we continue to support this effort. They had talks yesterday. Talk about an end game, Denver. What's the end game there?
Well, we've actually, I wish I could share some of the briefings. We've reduced a lot of our support to the Saudis. We're not actually engaged actively. But I will tell you this, just like we discussed with Afghanistan, me and you have discussed Yemen. You can discuss Syria. We can discuss Lebanon. We can discuss the West Bank. We can discuss Venezuela. We have to start making some decisions on when we start pulling out. The issue with Yemen, as it always is how far are we willing to go to stop Iranian encroachment? And Iran has been something that's just, they are our enemy. They're our enemy. And it's amazing to me that on the other side that they're still supporting the Houthis. And how do we do this? But at some point, I think we need to go out and help the Yemenis. I just don't know how we do that right now. Now, if we do pull out like a lot of people want, then we just exacerbate the issue. So again, John, you know that I want to end game there. I don't even see it. And that's just as honest and not apolitical as you can get. Mm-hmm. I don't think we have an end game there. I don't think we realize the extent, of how entrenched Iran is with the Houthis there also. They're not going to stop either. Mm-hmm. So what do we do there? Do we go all in, or do we pull all out? Or do we continue this sort of hand-to-mouth, very tiny increments of aid, what we're doing now, and support, against the Houthis? So that's, again, John, these are tough questions. And I think right now we have so many things going on around the world. We have got to start prioritizing and taking our guys out of areas that are troublesome areas that we don't have an end game in. We just have to do it.
So you would be in favor, like me, of we just can't police everything. It's just too big and it's too much. So you would be in favor of looking at certain situations that we're in that just get out and kind of you got to let the chips fall where they may, perhaps Afghanistan being one of them. That brings us, you just mentioned it, Maduro's government in Venezuela. Looking at the riots, Denver, I'm sorry, Denver, Congressman Riggleman.
Yeah, you know.
I'm sorry.
Friends call me Denny too,
I know that. But I want to be formal, Congressman Riggleman. So I don't, So anyway, Congressman Riggleman, looking at the riots that were going on in Venezuela over the weekend, these riots were, we have humanitarian aid, food and medicine trying to come in to Venezuela, and the Maduro government blowing up trucks with the aid and food on it so they can continue to starve their people and be the only purveyor of food, handing out their own food boxes. It was an incredible scene for people to see over the weekend. And where do we go from here with this?
Well, I just, I heard what you were playing by, earlier. I think that was Vice President Pence, but
yes, sir.
I heard you playing earlier. And at this point, I think what we're doing is we're isolating the regime financially, which is what we have to do. But again, if he gets support from other outside actors, and I think you know who I'm referring to, if countries like Russia, if countries like China, if other countries come in to support and prop up the regime, it's going to be very difficult to root him out. Mm-hmm. So really, this is, to me, it looks like a game of brinkmanship. How far are we willing to go to isolate Maduro? I don't know. Again, we're in a situation right now where I think we're trying to use as much, I would say, as much financial strain as we can put on them to force them into another course of action, and hoping that the Venezuelan people, pick correctly or get him out of there. And I think that's what we're trying to do right now. We're seeing this. I think this is our first phase of seeing if this works. I think that's where we're at right now. It's just how much emphasis, how much suggestive powers can we put on the Venezuelan people and the government to get him out. Let's see what happens. I'm not convinced, but we'll see what happens.
If he doesn't leave power or abdicate or whatever one does in this situation, what happens?
I don't know. I hope we're not. I hope we're not willing to engage again militarily and send troops to Venezuela. Yeah. I think that would be just a huge mistake, and to get entrenched in regime change again, I just can't imagine, how we would support that or what our end game would be there either. So again, are we willing to go into a South American country, and are we willing to use military force for regime change? That's something we haven't done in a long time. I would think we wouldn't, but I think we would just keep increasing, our financial stranglehold on them until they fold. But again, what does that do to the Venezuelan people? I think we got to be very careful on how we balance this.
Also, it would be counter to what the president campaigned on, which is not to get involved in international regime change, as we've done for a very long time. So I think it would be tough for him to reconcile that. So let's hope it doesn't go there. Dan, I want to get very quickly, Congressman Riggleman, to the domestic front. And the vote is coming today on the resolution the president has made for a national emergency to get the other $3.1 billion funding for the wall. The Democrats in the bill introduced by Congressman Castro expected to pass the House with Democrat support and some Republicans, and now expected to get maybe 50-51 votes in the Senate as well. So the president's going to veto it. You can't override it with two-thirds. So let me just ask you a blunt question. Who cares?
Goodness gracious. That's a blunt question. Are you talking about, who cares, as far as the public, or who cares in the Senate or the House? Who are you saying who cares? You talking about if this happens or not?
So 10 Republicans in the House vote with Pelosi, and 3 Republicans that are up for 2020, they vote with Schumer. And so the resolution to rebuke the president passes. It goes to his desk. He vetoes it. You can't get two-thirds in either chamber to override the veto. So it's just jumping up and down, and I guess makes the New York Times happy. And CNN's got something to blast the president on. But again, it's meaningless. So who cares what they do? You can't override his veto.
Go ahead. Sorry, John. I didn't mean to cut you off.
You can't override his veto. So my point is, who cares?
I think who cares on this, when you're moving forward, and people like me, right? There's so many pages and numbers to read, to try to see if this is actually in statute. And the frightening thing about this is there's really no definition on national security. So it looks to me by statute or law, he can do this.
Yep.
Congress has been abdicating power since 1976. And I think Congress has always had an issue. They've always treated the symptom instead of the problem. And I think I'm done with that. And, for me, as a constitutionalist, it is absolutely frightening that Congress has abdicated its power like this. So I think he does have legal footing to do this. I just think now Congress needs to go back and define national emergencies, and I think we also need to limit the power of the executive. I think it has to happen now. So that's where I'm at on this. In Congress, we're supposed to be a check on power, but since 1976, we've abdicated a lot of that power through actual, voted upon law. So he does have the standing to do this, and I think that should frighten people, but also it's what Congress has done, and it's legal. So that's where it's at right now. So I don't think a lot of the American public does care. To be honest with you, I think if they want to see it done, it's going to get done. But I do think Congress needs to start taking back its power.
So it sounds like, if I get you on the record, so you're not going to vote in favor of Pelosi's resolution. You're not going to vote for that. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, at this point, it has been awful for me because I can vote statute or I can vote idealistically.